Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geoff Winthrop. I'm Executive Vice President of Acquirent. Welcome to today's Math of Sales webinar. Really excited to dig into this with a good friend of mine, Bill Johnson. Bill is the CEO of Salesvue. I love to say that this is original content that I've created, but like any I beg, borrowed, and steal the content from Bill. And Bill, I saw Bill present this, a rendition of this presentation and talk at an AAISP meeting, and I asked Bill if I could be a part of it, because I do believe in the concept so much that, and he was great to say, yeah, let's do it. And so we're running the webinar Math of Sales, and so would love to introduce Bill Johnson. And as I discussed, Bill is the CEO of an awesome technology company in Indianapolis called Salesvue. He is a career salesman, very accomplished in a lot of different areas, especially we'll talk about his days at Primo, marketing automation solution provider. Has had multiple successful financial exits. And kind of the story behind this Math of Sales presentation, a lot of it will be, the story will be told from a LeadJen point of view. And LeadJen, for those of you that don't know, is a lead generation firm out of Indianapolis. Bill launched it in 2004. And just recently, September 1st of 2017, Acquirent has acquired LeadJen from Bill. So we have a intertwined relationship. And, and part of the story, Salesvue, Bill launched Salesvue, his technology company, to really support the efforts of LeadJen. And he'll get into his story in a little bit. My story, I'm Geoff Winthrop. I'm Executive Vice President and Partner of Acquirent. We started in 2004, and I recently, through the acquisition, been named President of LeadJen. We've worked for many companies assisting in sales strategies, operations, and execution, all through outsourced sales. And we have this concept of Math of Sales. We've been living for about 2 years now. We implemented the Salesvue technology in January of 2016, in efforts to really get our arms around what our conversion rates are, what our, connect rates, and all of the stuff that we'll be talking about today. And as I discussed, we acquired LeadJen in 2001, and I'm currently serving as the president of LeadJen. So, Bill, the story is now yours to tell.
Thank you, Geoff, and thank you for everybody joining us to hear about this subject that I find really intriguing and interesting. And so, as Geoff said, the outgrowth for LeadJen started when I was the former VP of Sales at a marketing automation vendor called Primo in 1999. And the marketing automation space probably really didn't take off until 2005 or 2006, but that didn't stop us from trying to get people interested in an enterprise marketing management solution. And the good news was venture capital was raining down from trees. The bad news was it was really hard to get my enterprise sales reps in the door. And I ended up hiring an inside sales team. I didn't know at the time it was, the equivalent of today's SDR team, but hired an inside sales team that supported the enterprise class field reps. And we put a process in place that was driven on an Excel spreadsheet by hook or by crook, and we would reach out to the executive ranks of the Fortune 1000 chief marketing officer or VP of marketing or so forth, and we would make, on average, 12 touches over a 14-week period. We'd send an email and we'd make a dial, we'd wait a day, make another dial, and we started to learn that the process worked. And as a matter of fact, it ended up driving about 85% of Primo's new name business, because as I tell people, the one thing that about an outbound process like this is the right people at the right company are being touched with some degree of professional persistency across the board, and they're hearing your message. You know, you can spend money on Google and AdWords and stuff like that, but you don't know who's actually doing the search. With an outbound program like we did at Primo that turned into LeadJen, you know that the right people are hearing the message with some degree of persistency. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll share some of the thought process behind it. So after I left Primo, we basically started LeadJen up with the idea being the same process. Let's take that Excel spreadsheet and apply it to multiple companies in multiple industries and see how well it works. And the good news was the process worked just as well. The difference was if it was a departmental solution, we might make 6 touches over a 3-week period instead of 12 touches over a 14-week period. And so we would experiment, but we still had the same Excel spreadsheet that called out the cadence that the inside sales team was supposed to use. And it worked really well right up until we started scaling the organization, and it became really hard to ascertain if the team was following the cadence that we had called out on the Excel spreadsheet. So in 2007, with 20 employees at LeadJen, we actually built the first version of Salesvue for LeadJen, and it was the idea of, let's automate this Excel spreadsheet. If we don't reach somebody on call 1, let's schedule the follow-up for call 2. If we didn't reach somebody on call 2, let's schedule the email for activity 3, or whatever the cadence was. But we wanted everybody within a specific company or a specific industry targeted with the same degree of persistency. And it worked and worked well. Once we rolled out Salesvue and removed the ambiguity from people trying to figure out when they were supposed to follow up, the productivity of the team tripled. We went from an average of 6 touches an hour to just under 18 touches an hour. And, you know, we even today in my role at Salesvue, we'll talk to companies who their sales team does 20 activities a day. We were doing just under 18 an hour. And I am a big believer that it is a math game. The more people you can put into the top of the funnel, the more activity you can drives more conversations and so forth. So we can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, Bill, and
yes.
I'll touch on that is, you know, something that we've always believed in and we've preached here as well, you know, at Acquirent, is that sales is a numbers game. It's, you know, it's always been a numbers game, and we always say, you know, the more doors you knock on, you know, the more opportunities you have, the more you'll close. And I think that message has reigned true, but I feel like depending on vertical, depending on certain things, like, you know, the math may be shorter or longer, you know, and I think that's been one of the challenges is, like, I think everybody conceptually believes that, you know, sales is a numbers game, you know, but I think the challenge has always been, well, what number should I be reaching for? And I think it's always been vague, right?
Very much so. And this is probably, if you take nothing away from today's webinar, this is probably one of the most important slides to understand. Is what we learned at LeadJen is the average connect rate. I mean, if a rep picks up the phone and dials 100 people, the average connect rate is somewhere between 6 and 12%, meaning 88 to 94% of those people require a follow-up call. And it's just that math stays the same whether you're making 2 dials or 12 dials. You're not going to talk to your population if you quit reaching out. And I've heard numerous sales reps say, well, I've left them a couple of voicemails. They'll call back if they're interested. That's not true in today's environment. There's too much noise going on, and you have to rise above the noise. And the other thing that, you know, you'll see on the next slide, but we don't need to go there yet, is the idea that, you can go back, is the idea that I hear people say, hey, before I pick up the phone, I've got to go to the company's website, or I've got to get on somebody's LinkedIn profile and figure out something to talk to them about. And my whole point here is you have a 1 in 12 chance of connecting with the end user, of your prospect. And if you can't evoke enough of a value proposition in a 30 to 60-second conversation to convey why they would want to take a meeting with you, then you probably need some better sales training. The idea that you're not, 11 out of 12 times, you're not going to talk to the prospect that you reach out to. The idea of doing 20 minutes of research to have a 1 in 12 chance of using that research is, I believe, just idiotic.
Crazy.
And I know there's lots of people that disagree with me, but I'm just saying our data, the data I'm going to share with you is from 1.5 million calls against 350,000 prospects and 190,000 accounts. So it's not like I'm making this stuff up. This is real data. And if you want to spend 20 minutes doing research, you're going to be lucky to have a conversation a day. One conversation a day. Geoff, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I'd say the same thing. It's, and I know we're in a world of social selling and, you have to be armed, you have to, but, from an outbound perspective, we still believe it's a numbers game. And if you're spending 20 or 30 minutes looking up your prospect and maybe connecting with them 1 out of 12 times, like there's a lot of wasted energy, wasted time. And, there's cool tools out in the Salesforce ecosystem that can help get you the information real time when you need it. So, obviously you can always go to the App Exchange to help kind of cut down on that research time. Because I'm a firm believer, like you, Bill, is that, you got to, it's still a numbers game. You still have to crank numbers to make it, to make the equation work for you.
Yeah, and the whole point is when you're doing an outbound effort, trying to get a meeting with a prospect, you're interrupting their day with that initial phone call. And you're not trying to sell them something. You're trying to sell them on a 30-minute, 45-minute, hour-long discovery call, whatever it is. And I'd like to think that your sales team can be enabled with enough content and with enough knowledge that they can have that conversation without having done 20 minutes with the research. Once the meeting is scheduled, if the sales rep that scheduled the meeting is responsible for the follow-on call, then by all means, do your LinkedIn research, hit their website, look at Crunchbase to see if they raise capital, do whatever you need to do to make sure you can have a relevant conversation. But the initial conversation is, hey, I've interrupted your day. I'm just trying to get 30 minutes on your calendar so we can talk about what my solution might be able to do for you. Let's go to the next slide. And this is data that I'm sure many of you have seen before, where this was presented at the AAISP event. It says, and I put this up as a differentiator that said, if you do this, if you follow this prescription, whoever put this up on the board has never done outbound, because you would be lucky to make 6 dials a day. Be lucky to make 6 dials a day. And, when we're averaging just under 18 an hour at LeadJen, we know how many conversations we were having. If you have, if you do 100 dials, you're hopefully going to have 6 to 10 conversations a day. If you do 200 dials, you're going to do 12 to 20 conversations a day. And you cannot schedule a meeting until you physically have some correspondence with the prospect. Next slide, please. So what is this concept that we've identified called the math of sales? It's all about giving companies the ability to compare and contrast what I consider to be all things sales. What does it take to gain a connection or a conversation? And what's it take? How many conversations does it take to gain a conversion? And, the funny thing is, the good news is today you hear a lot of industry consultants talking about the number of activities you need to do to convince a prospect to take a meeting. And, InsideSales.com have published a Harvard paper that a Harvard professor did that said the average number of touches needs to be 6. The Bridge group now says 8 touches. And here's the challenge with that. I'm not disagreeing that you need to have some degree of persistency, but if I say to everybody on the phone, let's make 6 touches, and you've got 3 sales reps on your team as an example, and 1 rep calls his prospect 6 times that day, and 1 rep calls his prospect once a day for 6 days, and 1 rep calls his prospect once a week for 6 weeks. Guess what? Everybody's accomplished the goal. We've all called our respective prospects 6 times. But the recency and the frequency become the important variable in the equation, which is why it's so important to think about, okay, what's the outreach look like? How many times should we touch it? What's the email dispersion versus the telephony dispersion? How's that breakdown? And what's it really look like? And I'm going to tell you, when you take a mathematical approach to the problem, some of the data can be really eye-opening. And that's the whole point with the math of sales, is it should be a data-driven approach by each and every company and by every industry that they're selling into.
You know, and I think you kind of, yeah, Bill, I think you kind of hit on it is, you know, it's got to be very specific to industry, but even like think about, you know, inbound versus outbound, inbound by lead source. You know, there's so many just kind of variables that would change a cadence or, you know, kind of weigh into that kind of just very wide spanning average. You know, because each campaign is not created equal in my, you know, at least that's my opinion.
No, I agree entirely. So in the interest of helping everybody understand some of the data we captured, so I'm going to kind of go through a variety of different categories, but the data that I'm going to present was from 1.54 million phone calls to 350,000 leads to 190,000 accounts. And it's not just phone calls, because we would intersperse emails in conjunction with the phone call. We always believed that a multi-channel approach was best, but I'm not a big believer in the fact of let's just send 10 emails to a prospect and see what they respond to. So we would intersperse emails. We'd send an email and make a dial, and the dial, the voicemail would always reference the email to drive people back to look at the associated content. But you know, the key theme is there's a variety of providers: business services, engineering, software, financial services, not-for-profit, so on and so forth. And each one is a little bit different, and you'll see as we kind of go through the numbers here. So next slide, please. And while the data I'm going to present is mostly about outbound, it is absolutely works just as well for inbound. I know there's a number of industry pundits now that say the buyer is 70 to 90% educated by the time they get to you. And I've been fortunate or blessed to work with a bunch of different startups. And, you know, if you've got a revolutionary new product that nobody's heard of, they're not going to find you. I mean, maybe by the time Gartner gets around to writing about you, but you know, I was blessed to be a part of Parametric Technologies that revolutionized the CAD/CAM industry back in the early 90s. And $2.5 billion industry, and they blew the whole thing up. But nobody had heard of Pro Engineer by that time. So, and it was a true paradigm shift in the industry. So, you know, outbound works in a lot of cases. Next slide, please. So this is the total data in terms of what 1.5 million calls against 336,000 leads, 190,000 accounts that drove just under 20,000 appointments. And you can see that, you know, across the board, call number 1 had a decent amount of activity, 12% of meetings scheduled on call number 1, 49% were on call number 2, 18% were on call number 3. and you can see as it cascades down. Now, the important correlation that I always ask people to think about is try to tie in your opportunity data to this. Be able to go back and look so you can figure out, all right, yes, only 4% of our meetings were occurred on call 6 or 2% on call 8, but of the 300 meetings that were scheduled on call 8, what percentage of those actually turned into a forecastable deal? And so when you draw that parallel, that correlation, it really does help you understand. Because you might sit here and say, well, 61% of our meetings occurred by call 2. That's all we really need to do. I'd rather go put fresh data in the top of the queue. Great. What percentage of your opportunities are you missing out on? Next slide, please. So this is a number of activities done for SaaS companies selling into marketing. And, the first 4 attempts, generated 85% of the total number of appointments. But I can tell you from talking to our customers that a lot of the actual interest and forecastable deals actually occurred in calls 6 through 9. And that's why I say it is crucial to be able to give attribution to where the forecasted deal showed up and what it was worth to the company, and did the sales team close it. And so it is about professional persistence. It's about not quitting after 1 or 2 attempts. It's about being multi-channel focused, sending emails, making dials, and just following the process to identify what works best for your own organization. Next slide, please. So this is a financial services slide, and you can see that, if you looked at the data, you'd sit here and say, well, I guess we should quit calling after call number 5. We only had 1% of our total appointments occurred on call number 5, but then you look at attempt number 6 and attempt number 8, 7% and 5% of the population of meetings that occurred on those activities. And this is why it's crucial to put a process in place, follow the process, analyze the data. Take a look and understand what it's taking to get somebody interested in hearing about your solution. Next slide, please. This is business services. And so you see that there is a high degree of correlation between activity in the early stages of the process and the number of meetings scheduled. In all the cases, roughly 70 to 80% of the meetings that got scheduled occurred, by call number 4, by activity number 4. But if you understand what the outcome is, and you start looking at 66 meetings scheduled on call number 6, 25 on call number 7, 21 on call number 8, and you're able to ascertain which one of those turned into forecasted deals and which ones closed, it can be really, really powerful. Next slide, please. Healthcare is an interesting one. These are companies that sell into the healthcare market and sell into hospitals, home healthcare facilities, and so forth. And so you can see the total number of appointments is, at LeadJen, we considered ourselves experts in healthcare, and you can see that there were a lot of activities that occurred early on. But again, the process flow stays 5% of the meetings scheduled on call number 6. And should we have quit after 7, 8, 9? Not based on the forecasted data that came back to us. Every one of those meetings that occurred late cycle turned into a forecasted deal. So it's powerful in understanding that. Next slide, please. So SaaS IT, IT is one of the tougher functional areas to sell into. So not knowing what the population of people in here is, the challenge is there's a lot of noise. there are a lot of companies selling into the IT organization, and there's a challenge. So you really need to work with your marketing team to come up with really good content, because you can see here 5% of all meetings occurred beyond on the 5th call or greater. And if you've got something IT is interested in, they'll respond quickly. 87% of all meetings occurred in the first 3 attempts. And so it is a very discriminatory audience to sell into the IT organization, and persistency doesn't really drive significantly better results when you're selling into IT. Next slide. Engineering software. Engineers, 60% of all of our meetings scheduled with engineers occurred in the first call, and that call had been in conjunction with an email. So there was an email sent and a dial made. And once again, engineers, if they like what they're hearing, look at that, 95% of all meetings occurred by attempt number 3. We could have made 8 attempts, but the data didn't support doing that. It would have been a waste of our sales team's time. Next slide. And this is Salesvue's own data. 23% of all of our meetings occurred on call 8 and 9. VPs of sales who we're targeting are hard to get a hold of. But I can tell you, and I'll preview to the next slide, 38% of all of our opportunities occurred with meetings that occurred on call 6 or later. 38%. And so if we would have quit after calls 1, 2, or 3, we would have missed out on a lot of our forecasted deals that turned into revenue. And this is what the math of sales can bring you, is the ability to apply science to this quote unquote art of selling. Next slide. So I've kind of hit on this part. 38% of all Salesvue pipeline was generated from those appointments. Next slide. So I got 2 examples of the math of sales reporting. This is by comparing 10 sales reps, and the data may be hard to see, but I'll kind of go across. And so you got no touch as a column, touch, conversation, conversion, and total number of activities, entity count, and then what the math of sales is. And this is for 10 sales reps at one of our customers. And a no touch is an email. You get to define what it is, but they did not want to count emails as touch because it's too easy to send out 100 emails in Salesvue. And so having a busy day, I've sent out 100 emails, and that took you from 8 to 8:02. Touch is picked up the phone and dialed somebody. Conversation is the prospect picked up the phone and you talked to him, and the conversion in this particular case was a proposal was sent out. And you can see the top 2 reps were doing a lot of activity, 2,000 total activities in the total column against 618 entities, and they gained 6 conversions. So the math of sales for this rep was 168 to 62 to 1. 62 conversations to gain 1 conversion. If you look at the bottom, you've got a rep that is having 247 conversations and gaining 49 conversions. So his math of sales is every 6 conversations he's having, he's gaining a conversion. He is 10 times better than the rep at the top. So in your business, who do you want picking up the phone and trying to convince a prospect to take a meeting? So the math of sales is, go ahead.
No, I was going to say this one was always eye-opening to me because, as a sales, I put my sales manager hat on. I look at it and as you're evaluating talent, there's ability and there's, skill, and are they doing the effort, right? So if I'm looking at that first one, I see, okay, well, they're cranking it out. They, 2,000 touches, but their conversion rate, is rough, right? It's 62 to 1. As a sales manager, I look at that and I say, if the effort's there, I feel like I can help. That's a coaching moment right there. There's a way to help kind of, to shorten that gap, right? But if you look at it and you say, hey, listen, the effort's not there and the conversion's not there, then that's a different conversation, right? So you can almost look at the math of sales to help from a performance improvement or disciplinary fashion to say, is the effort there? If the effort's there, great. We can coach you to get better, to help you close your conversion rate.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Next slide, please. So we just showed you what 10 reps look like. This is an example of another customer of ours that wanted to understand which marketing programs had the best math of sales. And when we asked the director of marketing what she thought was her best marketing lead source, she said, well, online marketing. It generated 4,200 leads. If you look at the end of the account column, 4,200 leads. And what it really was 4,200 names. And this is where there needs to be some correlation between sales and marketing in terms of what's a lead and what's a name. And so their goal was a conversion for them was a marketing qualified lead, where marketing had a conversation with the prospect and they had some criteria to potentially buy the client solution. And I pointed out to this director of marketing that the 4,200 names was your cheapest name source, but 12,000 activities your team in marketing to generate 76 MQLs, this all of a sudden became one of your most expensive marketing qualified leads. With,
and that helps, that whole, marketing says, hey, listen, I'm producing the leads. Your salespeople just can't close or sell, and salespeople, sound whiny and say, marketing's sending me crap, leads. This kind of helps bridge that gap to say, to bring visibility into, hey, listen, this is a team approach, and it does get down to the science of what are your best lead sources and holding both sales and marketing accountable.
Without a doubt, it's one thing for the sales team to say marketing is giving us lousy leads. It's another thing for marketing to say the sales team isn't following up on. This is the one way that you can draw everything together and understand, is it a sales team issue, they're not following up on it, or is it really a poor marketing investment? Because I've not met a marketer yet that likes to provide bad leads to the sales team. It's just, can they get the data back? Next slide, please.
So this is where, so I think this is where we throw something like this in, because I think over the years, we've talked to many companies, and we start digging down into metrics and say, okay, as they try and justify hiring, either building an internal sales team or hiring an outsourced one, hopefully ours, but we say, hey, listen, we'll help you build a Proforma. We just need to know some of the pieces, right? It's some of the parts to the equation. So, okay, what's your conversation to demo rate? What's your demo to proposal rate? What's your proposal to close rate? What's your average sale? How many months does it take, to close? And so we start getting that, and 99% of the time we're like, well, yeah, our conversion rate is 30%. And you can kind of see the thought bubble pop up and say, well, you really don't know that to be fact. That's just more of a gut, right? And so I think knowing kind of from the ground level, what your actual rates are, really can help, kind of reverse engineer a number, or really help kind of build the equation that is built off of actual data to really either ramp something up or to really get to that higher level conversation to see if the ROI is there. Because like I said, we build it, and this is an example of a sample Proforma based off of gut feel versus real data. Without a doubt.
So the summary and the point here is with the right data, with the right knowledge, you can make your sales team as proficient as possible. Without the right information, there's no way to create a repeatable, scalable process flow within the sales organization. And I fundamentally believe the math of sales is the one true way to compare all things going on within a sales and marketing organization in a very easy to understand process flow that distills it down to what's it take to move the needle, to get one more customer in the boat, to get one more prospect interested.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll leave it open for Q&A. If you have questions, please use the chat feature and we'll answer them. And to get the creative juices flowing, we have a couple, teed up for us. So one of them that I had was, so obviously Salesvue is a great technology and it's something that's helped us. But for those of you that may not have may have Salesforce, Dynamics, something like that doesn't have a cadence tool, Bill, then this would be directed to you. Like, if you don't have the technology to drill to that level of detail, what's the next best thing? How would you go about that to really kind of start honing in on those KPIs?
Yeah, I think there's no question Salesvue makes it easier to push a button and get the results out, but the data's there. I mean, so most everybody has a CRM tool, and what I would challenge you is to say, okay, how many entities is my team reaching out to this week, this month? And entities could be prospects, it could be accounts if you follow an account-based marketing strategy. Well, let's assume it's a rep is reaching out to 100 prospects. Most CRM tools do let you capture how many activities, and the understanding how many activities you're doing against those 100 prospects. Is it 200 activities, so an average of 2 per prospect, or is it an average of 1,000 activities, or 10 per prospect? And then how many meetings are being set up? All this should be, yes, it's a pain, but it's easy enough to do by putting an Excel spreadsheet together and saying, Rep A, 100 prospects, 1,000 activities, 10 meetings. Rep B, 50 prospects, 50 activities, 1 meeting. And so you can start to ascertain and understand. When you start holding your team accountable for those level of metrics, it becomes a lot easier to work through the whole organization. Everybody starts to understand what you're paying attention to. Does that help?
I believe so. So we have another one that says, Geoff, could you define the headings for the production level slide? So I believe I'm going to try and do that. Maybe there's 2 that we're looking at. And Tanner, hit me up if I'm not covering this exactly right. But so on this slide, the production level that I believe is no touch, percentage, conversations. What's your percentage there? Conversions, whatever you define to be your conversion. If it's an appointment set, if it's a proposal issued, whatever we believe that conversion is. A lot of times it coincides with an opportunity creation. Kind of the aggregate of all that. This is against the entity count. So, right, how many activities versus how many entities, either leads or accounts that you've called against. And then it kind of boils it down to total touches to what's your conversation rate to conversions. I hope that helps. Same thing on the marketing slide, same categories as well. And then, on this one, I don't know if this is part of the production level slides. This is the higher level Proforma, but that kind of takes into those other kind of key attributes to say, hey, starting with a call, how many calls does it take to have a conversation? So what's your call to conversation rate? How many conversations does it take to either schedule an appointment or, the site visit, or, how many office visits in this case does it take to get a proposals to close? So those are some of the key things that you need to be keying in on.
So Heather put up a chat request about what are some of the key metrics you would recommend us to key in on, and the key metrics to me are entities or prospects. How many prospects is a rep working? How many activities are they doing? How many conversations are occurring? So those first, entities or prospects, activities, conversations, and then meetings. Those four things. And then the natural one is the opportunity that gets created, but most people already have a pretty good handle on their forecast data. The first four are a lot harder. It's the idea of what's it take to get somebody interested.
Yeah. So we will, let's see. So I've got another one here. So how long would you say is a suitable time frame to track metrics before setting an initial conversion ratios? So, how long should, what's a good sample size to say I've got a pretty good handle on my data, Bill?
My whole thing is 100 conversations. So it could be 10 reps having 10 conversations within an industry, or 5 reps having 20. I like to have 100 conversations to understand how many activities it took to generate those 100 conversations and how many conversions occurred from those 100 conversations. And if you're selling into multiple disciplines, let's say you're selling into the engineering area and the marketing area and the IT area, you might have totally different rates within those functional areas. If you're selling into different industries, you're selling into retail and financial services, and you might have totally different rates. And it's important to understand that, because that's the one thing that we figured out at LeadJen was everybody's a little bit different, and if you assume the same cookie cutter approach, you're going to miss out on a lot.
Yeah, and I think also, so I think that's definitely from the appointment set, but I think, would you say, and this is more a question for you to dovetail off that, but would you say, to see, like, track ROI, obviously that would coincide with your sales cycle, right? So you can, within 100 conversations, you can kind of start to see the conversion rates on appointment set, but then, I would assume it would take us a little longer period of time to start seeing, okay, well, how many do those turn into a proposal? And then if I have a 6 to 8 month sales cycle, then obviously we have to wait it out to see, kind of the fruits of that labor. But at least to get going, right, it's that 100 conversations is a good base, right?
That's what I've lived on, just based upon the data we collected at LeadJen over the 14 years.
So, and I'll wrap up, and obviously we'll let anybody else kind of key in, but we'll wrap up with one more. And obviously, Acquirent has drank the Kool-Aid on having a technology help us with these equations, and really cadence and adherence, and just making sure everybody's kind of singing from the same songbook. Because obviously in a lot of sales organizations, you can prescribe, hey, here's our cadence, this is what we do, but salespeople can really decide what they want to do, right? Do I call this person today? No, they're probably having a bad day, I'll call them a week from now. Or, so what are ways, if you don't have kind of the tools like a SalesVue to kind of make sure reps are all following the same cadence, what are some manual ways to really assist or just to inspect what you expect, would you say are ways to just make sure that your team is on the same, following the same playbook?
Yeah, it's a challenge. That's why we built SalesVue when we scaled from 4 to 20 employees, because we had, yes, you can do it via an Excel spreadsheet with a limited number of employees. The problem is traditional CRM, Salesforce, NetSuite, Microsoft, Oracle, they don't really allow you to automate a distinct process. And so I don't have a good answer for how do you do it if you've got 10 reps. You know, you might be able to pull some reports from your telephony system to see how many dials were being made. But once again, I don't know that somebody's not calling a prospect 6 times in a day or once a month for 6 months. I don't know what the recency and frequency is, and it's a challenge. It's like I said, we were able to manage it with an Excel spreadsheet with 4 employees, but when we had 20, it was you'd have people trying to game the system, and we wanted to stop that.
Right. Well, you know, we are creeping up on the hour, so, you know, just appreciate everyone's time. Bill, thank you very much. You know, like I said, when I saw you present this, I said, I got to be a part of that, because I believe wholeheartedly in the math of sales and in sales being a numbers game and knowing what your equation needs to be. If anybody wants to talk to Bill or I or connect, you know, you can always reach me at jeff.winthrop@acquirent.com. Happy to talk about sales strategies, dashboards, analytics, any of that. You know, fancy myself as a Salesforce guru, and that's me putting me up there. But really, the best guy to talk to is Bill, and Bill can be reached at bill@salesvue.com. You know, and he can help with any of the, you know, how do you leverage technology to enforce your team all singing from the same songbook? How do you really get to the real granular metrics that you need to do to run your company? And with that being said, thank you. This will be recorded and sent out to everybody. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you.